Hello everybody. Today I'll show you what are some of the common issues that you may encounter while creating spline meshes in Unreal Engine. I'm creating spline meshes here with PCG. This is my road generator. You can watch a tutorial about it on my channel. I show how you can create every functionality of this road generator, but currently we are just exploring the spline mesh. It doesn't really matter how you generate the spline mesh. The important thing is to understand how it works and what are the issues that you may encounter. So the first issue that I've prepared an example is if you have a mesh that doesn't really fit the beginning and the end of the mesh don't connect seamlessly. So if you have a mesh like this, for example, where if you duplicate it and place the ends next to each other and they are connected seamlessly, you have no issues using this mesh with a spline mesh in Unreal Engine. But if your mesh doesn't fit the beginning to the end, like is this quicksell mesh of a Japanese shrine path, it doesn't really fit the beginning to the end. You have a gap between them because the spline mesh component is using the bounding box of the object, and if one of the ends is protruding a bit more, this will create a gap between your objects, and you can see this gap here. This is the spline mesh component. It's trying to fit these meshes next to each other, but it can't. It leaves a gap. And even if there is no gap between these meshes, they are not created to seamlessly transition from each other. They have different structures at the end and at the beginning, so you will not have a seamless transition. I'll show you how you can fix this. The next issue that you may encounter is to have a modular mesh like this, again a quicksell example, which is supposed to be fitted with the next mesh with an overlap. So this mesh, if you fit them next to each other, like the spline mesh component will do, it will leave these rivets not connected to anything, so it will not be realistically represented in your level. The model is supposed to be used like this. So this pole from the ground is supposed to hold both the back part and the front part of this fence mesh here. So the next example that I prepared is a mesh like this. So again, this mesh doesn't have really seamless transition between the start and the end, and also it doesn't have one of the sides closed. So if you try to use this mesh, you have this gap, and when you look from the back of one of the sides, it will be transparent. You'll have problems with the shadows like this. So even if you're not seeing this mesh, if you're walking below it, you still have this problem that the shadow is not being cast from this object. So this mesh needs to be fixed as well. So I'll show you how you can use the Unreal Engine modeling tools to fix these three issues. Let's first start working on this example with this path. So the mesh that we have from quicksell, as you already saw, it doesn't really fit well. So what we can do to make it fit better is to cut the sides so they're a straight line, so it can fit perfectly, and then flip the object the other way around, so we are sure that the beginning and the end are matching perfectly. So I'll duplicate this model. So Control D or right click and duplicate, so I don't edit the original model that quicksell provides. So the model right now, I'll work on this new model, is the same as the default one, but I'll add a cube which I'll use to cut out a part from this object. So let me scale the cube in the way that it covers fully from one end to the other this object, and then I'll select the path object, I'll select the cube, I'll go to the model section of the modeling tools, and I'll click the Boolean operator. And here there are a couple important options to know. So we're using the difference now. This means that it will subtract the second object from the first one. So I selected first the path and then the cube. This is why it uses the cube as a part to be subtracted from this path. If I select the difference b minus a, the first object will be cut from the second one, like you can see now. If I choose the intersection, this means only the part that the both objects are intersecting will be used, and the union means that both objects are combined. And here, use first mesh material checkbox is clicked. If I don't click it, this means that when you perform some Boolean operation, the part that the two objects meet will use the second object material. I don't want this in this case, so this is why I'm clicking this checkbox, use first mesh material. And some other important options here, where to write the changes to. You can create a new object, which is the default, and you can save to the first input, which is currently this path object, which I selected first. So this is why I'm using the first input object. And then you can select what to do with the input objects. After you combine them and apply these changes to the first object, what you do with the path and the cube. So I'll keep the last input. This means that we'll keep the cube and will not delete it. If I leave it to the default delete inputs, this cube will disappear, but I'll need it again later, so I'll leave it as keep last input. So these are the most important settings here. And the next thing that you need to consider here is where to place this cut. So if you want to cut, for example, some stones, make sure that you cut around the middle of the stone, because this stone will be then flipped and connected to the other side. And if I do it like this, for example, if I leave just a very thin part of this stone will be duplicated and it will look like a very thin stone. So it will not look very good. So, for example, I can cut right here. So I completely disregard this part at the end with these pavement stones next to each other, or I can do it like this. So they are, half of them is still being used. Let me do it that way. I'll use half of them, let's say. And also make sure to take into consideration the visual style of the object. So, for example, if you cut it like this, it will be very easy to see that these things will be repeating on the other side. If you do it like this, it will be a little harder to see, because this is more generic pattern. Let me accept this, and you can see that now I have this object without this part at the end. So from this object, I'll also cut out the other end. So we have at both ends this straight line. So I'll select again the path, then the cube, then again Boolean, and difference a minus b. And again, make sure to take into consideration the visual style of the object. So something like this, for example, looks fine to me. Click accept. Then we'll no longer need this cube anymore. And this object, in order to be easier to be flipped to the other side and connected properly, I'll use the X-form option here into the modeling tools, edit pivot tool, and then I'll click the back option. So you can see you can make the pivot be in the center, bottom, top, left, right, back, front, and world origin, which is somewhere far away in my level. So I'll use the back option right here, because I want to scale then this object based on this pivot point. So I'm sure that it matches completely to the other side. So I'll accept this. Now I'll duplicate this object by clicking Ctrl D, and I'll scale it in the X direction, which is this red arrow here, -1. And you can see that this object fits perfectly right now. And I can select both of these objects, then go to the model section again, Boolean, and union operator. I'll click accept, and right now I have now this new mesh created. You can see if I place it on the level, some of the parts are a little bit too low. This is because my pivot is too high into the object. So let's go back here into the X form, edit pivot, and I'll move the pivot a little bit down. So it's just next to the ground right here. Click accept, and now it's better. I can place the object, or it will maybe even be better if my pivot is here at the beginning. So I'll go edit pivot again. I'll click the front, the back. Okay, so this side seems great for the pivot. I'll click accept. And right now I can use this object anywhere in my level if I want to. I didn't accept maybe the change to the pivot. Let me go to the back again. I'll move it a little bit down. Accept. Okay. So right now, if I replace this spline mesh with this newly created mesh we have here, you can see now we no longer have these gaps in the road. So everything is seamlessly connected, and we have this great modular mesh to work with our spline meshes. So this is the first mesh that I wanted to show you. Let me save everything, and let's continue to the second example right here. So the second example, if you remember, was that this mesh, the way it's created by Quixel, is supposed to be used overlapping like this. Let me get the snapping option here. Okay, so it should be overlap like this, but if we use a spline mesh, it will just stack them next to each other like this, and it will not look great in your level. So how we can fix this? So let's go to this mesh right here into our content browser. Let's duplicate it again. So I'll choose the duplicate option, and I'll use this newly created mesh so I don't ruin the official mesh that I downloaded. I'll create again a cube object. So go to shapes, cube, and move it so it overlaps this model, fully overlaps this model. So right now I want to cut out this part and add it to the object to the other side. So I'll place the cube so that it completely covers the part that I want. I'll duplicate this object again. So I want to have two different objects, the one without this part and only this part. So this is why I need these two objects into my content browser. So I'll continue with the first one. I'll select it. I'll then select the cube. I'll go to the model, Boolean, and then do the difference. Again, make sure that you have all the options like before. Write to first input object, keep the last input again, and use first mesh material right here, and difference A minus B. So everything seems fine for now. You can see we are getting rid of this end part from this object. So click accept. Now I can select this object, this newly created object without this, the part with the pole, and replace it with the one that we didn't delete, this end part. So just drag it over the static mesh field here, and you can see into the cube I have this mesh that we cut out from the other model. So this is important to not move the cube. You just want to use the part of the mesh that is inside the cube, and if you move the cube, the parts won't match perfectly. But if you don't move the cube and select this fence mesh, then select the cube, then go to Boolean, and this time choose the intersection option. This will leave you only with this end part right here. I'll click accept, and we don't really need the cube anymore. I have this part right now. I'll duplicate it into my level, and it seems to move a little bit, so I'll copy the location from this original one and I'll paste it to the other one. So they're both on the same position. So if I replace one of these objects with the one that we deleted this part, you can see that they match perfectly at this end. So you cannot see the seam. So our Boolean operations went great. And now we can move this part right here where we want to overlap with the model. And then we can select both parts and again go into the model, Boolean, and choose the union. Then click accept, and I now have this mesh created, which is perfectly seamless from the beginning to the end. I'll edit the pivot again, go to the X-form, edit pivot. I'll click the front, and here I'll move the pivot down to the ground. I believe it was 90. Yeah. So right now I'll click accept, and if I copy this and place it here at the end, you can see that the objects are matching perfectly, unlike before. So let me delete this and I'll go here. So this is how we have it before. This part with the rivets is not connected to the pole that we had. So let's replace this with the newly created mesh that we have. And right now you can see our fence is completely connected everywhere and we don't see any seams and any gaps. So this was an easier fix now that we know how this procedure works from the first example. And let's go to the last example. So here we have this gap on top of the object. So even if we go up, we have a problem with the shadow. So that's why we need to fix this. So let's go to this model. The way I decided to fix this is, let's again duplicate this model. Let's use it in our level. And I duplicated again into the scene this object. Let me again copy this position, paste it here, and now I'll rotate this object 180 degrees so it fits on top of each other. And in order to have this look a little bit better, I'll rotate it into this direction as well. So I have these seams to match each other, but you can do it the other way too, the way you prefer it more. I like it a little bit better like this. So to make sure that it matches great, we can do the same that we did for our fence right here. So first, let me select these both objects and go to the model section and create a union. So this is a single mesh. Right now, you can see this is a single mesh. I'll Then create the same thing that we did for the fence. I'll add a cube. I'll place the cube here at the end so that it completely covers the end. Let me scale it a little bit, so I'm sure that it covers the end from all of the sides. And right now, I'll duplicate again this shape to have the one that I'm going to create a difference from and the one that I'll do an intersection. So first, I'll select this, select the cube and do a difference. I'll accept this. Then I'll replace this with the other one, which one we are currently using. So this is the one we deleted, the fourth. We need to work now with the one with the 5. So let's replace this into the level. You can see it shows the outline inside the cube. So we know that this is not the one that we didn't do the difference still. So let's select again both objects and go into the intersection option. So I seem to have some of the objects placed in the scene on top of each other, so that's why you don't see great the preview, but I'll click accept, and if I delete this, you can see that, and delete the cube, you can see that I have this part, and I have the other part again. So let me duplicate this part again. Again, let's copy the location, paste the location for this one, and replace it with the other part. So these are my two parts. I'll move again to the end this piece. And here, to make them match a little bit better at the end, I'll go into the deform section. I'll create a lattice, which creates this mesh around your object. And you can use this mesh to deform it so you can match your objects better. Let me turn off the snapping of the grid. And right now I can use this tool to better match my objects at the end right here. Something like this. Okay, it seems fine to me right now. I'll do accept. And right now I'll select both objects, go to the model section and do a union operation, and then accept this. Then again I'll go to the X form, edit pivot, and click the front option, and I'll move this to the bottom of the model like this. Okay, I'll accept this. And right now, if I use this newly created object, I think it's this one. Yeah. If I use this newly created object, I no longer have any gaps and I don't have this hole at the top of it, and my shadow is working perfectly. So these fixes are really easy with the modeling tools of Unreal Engine, and as you can see, they allow you to create much better looking environments. One other important thing when working with spline meshes is the collision of these objects. So let me click the Alt and C key, which is the collision, show collision, or go here into the show and click on the collision. You can see it's Alt plus C. And you must make sure that your objects have their collision created. And for a spline mesh, it's really important that the collision is at a couple of parts if it's a very long spline mesh. So because we duplicated the object twice here, the collision is separated into two parts, and this means that if we edit this spline and have some better curvature here, you can see that the collision is following better this spline. If it was a very long box, you can have problems when you have curves in your spline meshes. And here, because we duplicated the object again, but we deleted part of this object here, we have a problem with our collision. So let's fix the collision for this object right here. Let's select this object into our scene. Let's open the editor for this object. Let's show the simple collision, and you can see here it has some useless parts here at the end. It's not covering well our area, so let's delete the collision by clicking here the collision menu and remove collision. Then let's click again the collision menu, click add box simplified collision, and this will create a box for your collision encapsulating the full object. You can scale this box a little bit down like this, move it to the side, scale it a little bit more. So you have it like this, and by out dragging to the side, create a second one. And in that way, you will make sure that if you have a bigger curvature for your spline mesh, you can separate this collision into two boxes so they can fit this curve better. If it's a single box, it will just connect like a straight line between them. So let's save this object and go into our scene and look here. If we create a tighter curve like this, you can see that if I toggle the collision here, this object have the collision line, the collision boxes follow better the curvature of the spline. So here we have the same problem. Let's edit again this object, show the collision, remove this collision that we have problems with, and then add a box. I'll leave it as a single box for this. I'll not have such curved concrete walls, so it will not be a problem for this mesh. So let's save this and go back into the level. Let's remove this other box. So, okay, this is the one that I have. The collision is again problematic on this one. Let's fix it. Save. And now everything is fine. As you can see, this is a lot better collision, fewer objects, no additional objects that are not matching the visible object. So this is another important thing for the spline meshes, to make sure that your collision is set up properly so that your player can walk on them and the collision actually matches the mesh that the player sees. And when you bump next to them, again, you follow the spline and not just invisible box at the end of the mesh you have. So this was everything for this tutorial. If you have some questions, please write in the comments. If you have some requests for other tutorials, again, you can write in the comments. And guys, it will help me a lot if you join the channel. It will allow you, if you join the higher levels, to watch the tutorials earlier. So please, if you like to support me, join the channel. You can like and subscribe for this channel, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.